Welcome, everyone. My name is Jonathan Hollerman. I'm the Deputy Director at the U.S. Task Force on National and Homeland Security. Today, we're going to do a quick update on national security issues facing our country and facing the world. So with us today, we have the opportunity to have David Pine with us. He's a national security strategist. He's also the Deputy Director of National Operations at the EMP Task Force, and he's also the editor of the Real War newsletter. So David, thanks for being on with us today.
Thanks so much for allowing me on the show.
Awesome. So, yeah, recently I heard a rumor that you recently met with Vivek as he's running for president. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I did a write-up. I did an article on my Real War Substack at dpyne.substack.com about that a couple months ago. But basically, I was just asked, he's had a lot of different briefings with a wide range of national security experts, and I was one of the ones his campaign asked me to go up to his headquarters in Columbus, Ohio, and brief them, mainly on the war in Ukraine, and just help him understand. He has actually really good understanding of the war in Ukraine, but kind of give him my viewpoint in terms of where that war is going, the risks that it has to U.S. national security in terms of potential vertical and horizontal escalation, either escalation to the nuclear level, or perhaps even a general war with NATO. And I was surprised by how courageous and fearless and bold he was in terms of the article he wrote in the Federalist about how to split the Sino-Russian alliance and end the war in Ukraine on June 6th. I think that was echoed by his speech last night at the Nixon Presidential Library as well.
Great. I don't I don't really get into politics a lot. I don't watch the news a whole lot, just because it's very frustrating, and I hear a lot of national security quote strategists on when I do see them, and a lot of times I just shake my head and I don't understand where they're coming from. It just seems like a big echo chamber when discussing the war in Ukraine. So, I mean, as you follow this very closely, can you discuss a little bit on the latest updates on what's happening in Ukraine and where do you see this all going?
Yeah, so obviously this is a war that's been going on for, I think, about 17 months, I think, since actually 18 months. Will be 18 months on the 24th of August, just next week. And it's a war that really Ukraine's never had any chance of winning. I predicted that before the invasion that no matter how many weapons that the U.S. and NATO sent to Ukraine, it would be unsuccessful in defeating Russia. Russia has, it's 35 times larger. Its economy is 11 times larger. It has over 5 times the population of Ukraine and about 5 times as many tanks, combat aircraft, and artillery systems. And most importantly, it has 8,000 more nuclear weapons. Ukraine, of course, having given up its nuclear weapons under the Budapest Memorandum of 1994. So the fact is that with the exception of the Polish Volunteer Legion, NATO countries have not sent any combat troops to fight Russia and Ukraine. And perhaps if we did, we might be able to win a conventional conflict in terms of liberating Ukraine from Russian control, but I can guarantee you they would escalate to the nuclear, perhaps EMP level prior to that happening.
Yeah, I mean that's a subject that comes up a lot that I get asked a lot. My kind of take on it is my biggest concern during this whole conflict is not really what's happening inside of Ukraine, but what's happening inside of the Russian motherland, let's call it. My concern has always been because the West and America is backing the Ukrainians, sending them weapons, sending them advanced weapons, and we're going to be looks like we're sending them planes next year. I've always been concerned that some of that advanced technology is going to start being used against Russia inside Russia. And I think that's a red line for Putin from the interviews I've heard from his top generals and from him himself, that, if there's large attacks happening inside the motherland to disrupt, I think he's going to, I mean, he already blamed us, but I think he's actually going to retaliate in some way, shape, or form against the West. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, just this morning, I read a report that credibly suggested the U.S. may have used a sub-kiloton nuclear weapon to destroy the Nord Stream pipelines. That the I think it was Sweden or some other country in Europe measured the seismic uh, reverberations or whatever from the explosion, and I think it was 400 times greater than reported. So it would have been the equivalent of a 200, like a point 0.2 kiloton detonation, which is like 400,000 pounds of TNT, or a sub-kiloton tactical nuke, which, we had many of those during the Cold War. We don't currently have any of those officially in our inventory. Russia has about 2,500 of those. But obviously, we know they didn't destroy their own pipeline. That was a $15 to $20 billion loss for them. And they immediately, tried to get bids to rebuild it. If you destroy your own infrastructure, you're not going to try to get contractors to bid to rebuild it. But it also, it mainly, took away a lot of leverage, economic leverage that Russia might have successfully used to get NATO, particularly Germany, which was the most adversely affected, to drop its military assistance for Ukraine. But we've seen that with Nord Stream. We've seen the Kerch Bridge, and those, of course, are all attacks. Well, Kerch Bridge, I guess, was inside Russia technically. Nord Stream was not. But then we've seen a lot of attacks like Russian military industrial facilities catching fire, partially severely damaged or even destroyed. And those could be active cyber operations. I mean, we had the commanding general of U.S. Cyber Command literally admit, I think it was in April of 2022, that the U.S. is actively conducting cyber operations, including offensive cyber operations against Russia on behalf of Ukraine. So, whether the U.S. did that or the UK or Ukraine, the fact is we are waging a war that is seriously impacting Russia inside the Russian Federation, not merely the newly annexed territories. And that is definitely a potential red line, which Putin could logically respond to by massive cyber attack or major cyber attack operations against the U.S. homeland.
Yeah, that was kind of, I didn't mention cyber, but that was kind of what I was talking about. And when this thing, in the early part of the war, that was my biggest concern, was that the Biden administration telegraphed that we were sending U.S. cyber warfare teams into Ukraine to help them fight Russia. I'm not even saying that we shouldn't have done it, but we surely shouldn't have advertised it in the media that we were doing it, right? So we know that U.S. cyber warfare teams have been over there and assisting them in this fight, and it seems like they've done a pretty excellent job as far as keeping the lights on in Ukraine, and somewhat. But that's always been my concern. Again, is if cyber attacks keep happening inside Russia, they have the ability to with cyber to hit us on our homeland here, and that goes to China. I mean, we just recently saw here, what was it, a week ago? There was a media report where the government is very concerned with how embedded China is into our national infrastructure, including our electric grid, which is something that we specialize in at the task force and that we're always aware of. So, as far as kind of what's happening with China, let's transition to them a little bit. How close is China to blockading or invading Taiwan? And do you think that they would attack the U.S. before they invade?
So that's a real threat. There have been reports that China is, in fact, practicing for an amphibious invasion of the U.S. rather than Taiwan. Credible reports, and that's really disturbing. The problem is we have a president who is, out to lunch, and I'm not saying that in a partisan way, but he just doesn't seem to have it all there, and he's stated 4 times that, we need to have he's provided strategic clarity on Taiwan, saying that he would defend Taiwan militarily because we're obligated to do so. And in fact, that's not true. We haven't been obligated to do so. We haven't had a mutual security agreement enforced with Taiwan for the last 44 years. He's never walked back those statements on personally. The White House walked back those statements. But my fear, and I think the fear of our great, courageous, late founder of the EMP task force, Dr. Peter Pry, who sadly and tragically passed away last year, is that this provides China with an incentive. If they think that we're going to respond militarily, they have a real incentive to potentially attack us first, even if they don't plan to invade us, with massive cyber and space warfare attacks on kind of minute one of the war, essentially, before they even blockade or invade Taiwan. But I do think that China is going to make their move likely next year, 2024. I've identified as the most dangerous year that's facing us for a potential war with China. And part of the reason for that is I've seen that their goal is to conquer or reunify with Taiwan by force if necessary by 2025. And I think the U.S. has never been weaker militarily relative to our enemies. During the past century, I don't even think before Pearl Harbor we were this weak, and a lot of people don't realize that. They assume that because we have a nuclear triad and a large size conventional military force, that is more than sufficient to defend the U.S. In fact, some of them still believe, and I think a lot of Republican members of Congress even believe that we're still kind of the most powerful country militarily, and that's just not the case. Russia and China, are allies. They've been military allies since July 2021 or 2001, and that alliance has only grown closer with Biden's decision to fight this proxy war in Ukraine, backed up, of course, by neoconservatives in Congress, and it's pushed Russia closer to China militarily, and I think that there's a very real risk that if we go to war with China in the Pacific, that Russia will join the war and fight actively as a protagonist on the Chinese side.
Yeah, and so it's kind of amazing. It seems the more we try and isolate Russia financially and unilaterally, as far as preventing them from kind of increasing their holdership on the world stage, we're really trying to push them down. And my stance has always been we're kind of pushing them in the arms of China. And we're seeing a lot of different agreements around the world with Russia and China and Saudi Arabia, and North Korea, and a lot of these other countries are almost I guess the way I would put it is it's almost like World War II. We're watching kind of the Allied and the Axis powers being built as we speak. We're watching like people, different countries picking sides, right? And it's not all going our way as far as allies go. So that's, in my opinion, is a concern as to where is this all heading, right? So recently you co-authored a book with NSA strategist Cindy Ayers called Catastrophe Now, and you discussed a lot of these topics in there, and I'd recommend everybody listening to this to go out and get that book, Catastrophe Now. World War III, like, without being I don't know, over the top about it, where if it were to happen in the near future, how do you see it kind of developing? What would be the signs that people should be watching out for? And then, as on a third section of that is like, how do you see it rolling out as far as like EMP, cyber? Is it going to go straight nuclear? Is it going to be a ground war? What are the objectives? Like, what are the triggering points that could kick off World War III, and how do you see that playing out?
Well, if you were to write, a Tom Clancy novel about how World War III breaks out, I think the war in Ukraine would be an excellent starter, an excellent prelude. It's very easy to see how that war could escalate, at least to the cyber and space warfare level, as we just discussed. And it would be the same, I think, with regards to a war outbreak of war over Taiwan. I think China has. They have a joint air blockade strategy in which they would blockade Taiwan. And I think they've calculated that that is the strategy that would have maximum chance of not having a U.S. military response. So that may be what they decide to do. But if they decide to do an invasion strategy, where they, stage an amphibious invasion, kind of in concert with what they'll call maybe a quarantine of Taiwan, which they cut off Taiwan from all outside support. My calculations is they likely could capture Taipei and the capital of Taiwan within 2 to 3 weeks. It would take the U.S. probably about 3 weeks or three months, 90 days, to assemble a large enough force to credibly break the blockade and perhaps land a small number of troops on Taiwan's eastern shore. And they'd have to be running the gamut of China's massive anti-ship missile capabilities, kind of the A2AD zone they have that goes out about 1,300 miles from the Chinese coast. But if we were to my assessment is if we were to go to war with China, we would essentially have to fire the first shot, assuming they didn't preemptively attack us, which they very well might, to break the blockade. And if we were to do that, I think that China would immediately attack us with a total comprehensive nationwide cyber and space warfare attack, aiming to take down, or take control of U.S. satellites, because they have been developing the means to do that, according to U.S. intelligence, and also that would blind us, essentially, cut off our military forces abroad from their commanders based in the U.S., and it would potentially substantially degrade our nuclear command and control system. So that, and shut down our entire country. Cars would still work, but they wouldn't have the gas because the gas pumps wouldn't work. So that would be a devastating attack, and could potentially alone enable China to win the war, essentially on the first day of the conflict.
So, what would be the best national security strategy to try and divide and maybe disrupt the Sino-Russian alliance that's happening today? And we see this playing out, and it's growing stronger, and more agreements. What would be the best way to disrupt that today?
So that's a really excellent question, and I think Vivek Ramaswamy's plan comes the closest to being a workable plan to do that. His plan essentially is to end the war in Ukraine with a negotiated peace agreement, essentially a Korean-style armistice, which would immediately end hostilities. This proxy war we have going on with Russia. It would establish a demilitarized zone. NATO would be guaranteed to never join, or Ukraine would be guaranteed to never join NATO. Would be permanently neutral with its security guaranteed by the U.S., UK, and France. Not in the sense that we would go to war to defend them, but in the sense that we would resume massive arms shipments in the event of future Russian aggression. And then we would establish like a free trade agreement with Russia. We would most importantly, we'd have a mutual security agreement with Russia, whereby the U.S. would return NATO to the pre 2016 status at the Warsaw NATO summit, where the U.S. and Western NATO countries would not have any troops deployed in Eastern Europe, and then Russia would have to withdraw its military forces and nuclear weapons from Belarus, and we would resume Western investment in Russia. We might even recognize the sphere of influence for the Russians over Central Asia. And this would provide them essentially everything they've been seeking. Vladimir Putin, a lot of people don't realize, he actually was kind of spearheading the integration of Russia into the West when he first came to power, both economically and in terms of the security infrastructure of Europe. He actually said in 2002 that he asked if Russia could join NATO. But he said he wanted us to make it easy. Essentially, he didn't want to have to beg for it. So that was a serious endeavor on his part, and it's one that he didn't totally abandon. I mean, certainly NATO membership he abandoned in 2007 after the U.S. said that Ukraine was going to join NATO. But in terms of the security agreement between Russia and the U.S. and NATO, He actually offered that once again, in December of 2001, which was 14 years after his initial mutual security agreement was offered at the around the time of the Munich Security Conference of 2007.
Awesome. Well, as always, really appreciate your insights on these complicated and tough questions. And what can our viewers do to keep up with your national security updates and help convince U.S. lawmakers to take action to defend this country?
Well, the most important thing I think is if you were to your listeners, our viewers were to buy the Catastrophe Now book that again, as you mentioned, I co-authored with Cindy Ayers and the late Peter Ritson-Pry. Because that book has not only provides warning and kind of outlines the threat, but it also provides real world solutions, including an alternate nuclear posture review, what we need to do to rebuild our America's badly undersized and increasingly obsolescent nuclear arsenal. One way to do that, of course, would be to reactivate the 2,000 strategic warheads we have in reserve that are partially dismantled. That would take about 2 to 4 years, according to the experts I've spoken to accomplish. But it can be done at a cost of only $100 million. So, for almost nothing, we spend $845 billion on defense, and for $100 million, we could more than double the size of our strategic nuclear deterrent to really, secure America against nuclear missile attack. We also need to build a comprehensive national missile defense system, as Reagan envisioned, Brilliant Pebbles being the best model, deploying space-based ABM interceptors, perhaps about 5,000 of them in space, to take out incoming missiles in their boost phase. And then, of course, hardening the grid against EMP attacks, something I think we haven't discussed yet in this show. That I believe could be done at the cost of no more than $50 billion. That'd be a one-time investment. So if you combine all those three things together, doubling the size of our nuclear deterrent, building a comprehensive national missile defense system, and then hardening the grid against EMP attack, those things could be done for about roughly $200 billion combined. And if you were to, it would take about 4 years to do it, all those three things. And if you were to, kind of divvy that out, that's about 50 billion extra a year. If we spend over 200 billion a year estimated to have 200,000 plus U.S. troops deployed abroad, 750 foreign military bases that the U.S. maintains. If we were to cut that by 25%, that alone could pay for securing the U.S. against nuclear, EMP, and cyber attacks. So I think that's one of the most critical recommendations we have in the book. And so I would urge our viewers to please share those recommendations. I have those on my Real War website as well at dpyne.substack.com. Share those with your members of Congress. Share them with elected state leaders as well, members of the state legislature, governor, lieutenant governor. There are measures we can do to harden the grid, both at the federal and at the state level. Unfortunately, we failed to do so in terms of funding hardening the grid thus far through Congress. The EMP task force has recommended that we do the president declare a national emergency to be able to, independent of Congress, to be able to allocate and repurpose defense funds to harden the grid. But these are the things that are going to save our country. But most importantly, we need to have leadership change, either a change in leadership at the national level here in the U.S., or simply the Biden administration turning to a more realistic foreign policy that abandons this idea of constant and unnecessary conflict with the Sino-Russian alliance, and by kind of adopting a policy of retrenchment rather than liberal hegemony, then we can reduce the threat posture to our enemies. And the more we threaten them, more we threaten Russia in Ukraine, the more we threaten China and Taiwan, the greater the threat to us, because they have the capabilities to destroy us. but the intent only materializes the more we threaten them, and that we would respond the exact same way. So this should not come as some kind of big revelation or surprise to our viewers. It's just foreign policy realism 101. So that's what I think we really need, desperately need. We need more diplomacy. We need to have peace offensives with Russia and China, primarily Russia. But we just need to, if we were to simply accept the winnings of our victory in the Cold War, and say that we'll defend our treaty allies and go no further, we won't defend Ukraine, we won't defend Taiwan. Any countries we don't have security agreements with, are ones that we will not defend militarily. As Vivek stated, we won't risk the lives, of our American boys and girls to defend countries that we don't have a supreme vital interest in defending. I think we can ensure the safety and security of American or citizens for decades to come.
Very well said. In the past, I don't even know if the quote is exactly accurate, but Reagan mentioned about talking softly and carrying a big stick. We seem to be using the stick a lot lately, but our homeland is completely unprotected against cyber, EMP, solar flare, physical attacks against the grid. So it's one thing to have a strong stance on the national stage and be getting involved in a lot of these foreign affairs, but when you don't have a protected homeland, it's kind of suicidal. It's kind of it's kind of stupid. So, but you are absolutely right. We need to get the lawmakers and get our representatives involved. The problem is the lawmakers and representatives, most of them are somewhat aware of these issues, but there's no one beating down their door. There's no grassroots. They're the people that elect them aren't asking them to act on this subject because 99% of Americans are unaware of the risk involved and that the lights could go out forever, essentially, if there was an EMP attack or a massive solar flare. So there's no urgency to act on their part. There's also a lot of electric utility lobbying happening at the federal and state level to the tune of $1 billion over the last decades, just at the federal level. So there's a lot of reasons why the politicians aren't acting. So David and I would both strongly urge everyone to kind of get involved. And a good first step, in my opinion, and David, I think you would concur, is the new documentary "Grid Down, Power Up" by David Tice. It's narrated by help me out, David.
Dennis Quaid.
Dennis Quaid, thank you. I was having
Yeah.
a brain malfunction there for you. Yeah, Dennis Quaid narrated. It's an excellent documentary. You go to griddownpowerup.com and check that out. He also has a good back end to his website where he has pre-crafted letters that you can kind of tune the way you like it and send it to your representatives, trying to encourage them to harden the grid, protect the homeland. So take a look at that. Also, we're going to put a link down below to the book Catastrophe Now, written by David Pine and Cindy Ayers. And I highly recommend everybody take a look at that. And hey, while you're down there, hit the thumbs up button, hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. And David, really appreciate you coming on again.
Thank you. And I just want to say one last thing, and that is please go to our website at emptaskforce.us. There you can fill out a form to volunteer to help out the task force, perhaps even volunteer to be part of the state leadership in your state and help the cause, and also to donate to our organization, because we are, despite our name, the Task Force on National Homeland Security, as a congressionally authorized board, we are a nonprofit organization, and so we need your help, your in time and money to be able to save our country. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And as always, prepare for the worst, hope for the best, and let God do the rest. Take care.